Hello, my name is Roisin and welcome back to my channel. So in today's video I am going to be reading the Women's Prize Shortlist. I did this in 2020 but I skipped it in 2021, but I'm going to do it again this year. So there are 6 books on the Women's Prize Shortlist this year and I will talk to you about what they are as we get to them. I am feeling a bit apprehensive about the Women's Prize Shortlist this year because I know a lot of people have been a lot of the people that I've heard who are reading it have not been loving it. One of the books on this list I have already read, and that is The Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead, which I read because it was shortlisted for the Booker Prize last year. And 2/3 of that book I absolutely loved and could have been my favourite book of the year if it weren't for the 1/3 of that book that I really didn't like. It's the story of a Marion who is a pilot, being part of a smuggling ring, a bootlegger, and into the Second World War and wanting to fly a circle around the earth, a perfect circle. And then the other bit is Hadley, who is an actress in the 21st century who is involved in a scandal and a big fantasy series and ends up being hired to play Marion in the film of her life. And I will let myself from last year tell you why I hated the Hadley sections so much. The most disappointing book on the Booker shortlist for me. I fell in love with the writing of the historical part, and that remained mostly true throughout. The nature writing here is lovely, the characters that she's developed and their relationships through the historical part is lovely, and most of the writing is lovely. The non-historical part, the part set in 2014 when the making of the movie, first off, why? It kind of does get explained in a way that makes me be like, okay, I see why you did it, but why did you have to do it this way? I would have preferred you to keep that in the historical part because this modern part was so fucking annoying. I don't really care about celebrity culture. And then on top of that, all this sort of pseudo-intellectual faux philosophizing. It's not just the, oh, I don't like the characters, it's I don't like the narrative voice of that part was annoying to me. I don't like the actress who was doing the audio book part of that either. And every time I was picking it up, I was like rolling my eyes. And then towards the end, that narrative voice, basic ideas presented as if they're blowing your mind, it crept into the historical part as well. The second to last fifth of the historical part, there was all this talk about life and the meaning of life, and I'm like, please, just let me get that from the plot. Wish that had been edited. Like, this was so long and it didn't need to be, and it started to drag towards the end. I could have loved this book. I could have loved this book so much. I am set up entirely to love this book. You just go and ruin what could have been my new favourite book. And I feel like with the other ones I've had so much more to talk about, which is another sign, I guess, of how I felt about this. There was so much to love, and I think that the reason I'm annoyed with it is because I like 85% of it more than I like 3 of the other books on this list, but that 15% is my least favourite bit, my least favourite writing that I've read in this whole vlog. So there you have it. I have now started the book of Form and Emptiness by Ruth Ozeki. That's the first one that I am reading so far. I'm not very far into it though. I've only read the first chapter, and it is the biggest and chunkiest, I think. It is about a boy who has lost his father at the very beginning of the book, who is a jazz musician and a Japanese man, and he has started to hear the voices of inanimate objects. That's all that I've got so far, but I'm going to go on with that. Today is the first day of the 4-day Platinum Jubilee weekend here in the UK. Not a big fan of the royal family or the Queen myself, but I am a big fan of a 4-day weekend. Got to be grateful for some things. Anyway, yesterday on my cycle home, I fell off my bike, and this seems to happen to me fairly regularly. I am a very clumsy person, but I've started cycling all the way to work, which is 10 miles, so it's a 20-mile round trip, and I have not fallen over doing that trip until yesterday, and I smacked my knee. I don't know how much you can see of that. Can you see that? It's huge. Like, this bit is all swollen, and then there's a bruise, but I feel like the colour's kind of blown out, and you can't see how purple it actually is. So I am not sure when I'm going to get back on my bike. Today we are going for a barbecue in our friend's garden. The weather looks okay, but I don't know if it's quite warm enough to be sitting in a garden, which is unfortunate because it is the 2nd of June. This weekend is one of my best friend's hen parties, so it's not a big like going away staying somewhere hen party. It's just going to be in London and it's mostly the Saturday. Okay, so I'm gonna get ready now to go to the barbecue, and I will talk to you when I've read some actual books. Hello. I am in my PJs because I worked from home today, and yeah, I haven't spoken to you in a while because it's Tuesday. I went to a hen party this weekend, bank holiday weekend. The next day was not in any fit shape to be speaking to the camera, and the anxiety was bad, so I was not able to talk to you. I have been sick since then, the past 2 days. I don't think it's hangover related, although yeah, my body's just doing its biannual, my digestive system hates me, and I'm really struggling to like keep anything down at the moment, which is why I'm at home, because I went into work yesterday and that was not a good idea. So yeah, I haven't spoken to you for a while, and so I'm still in my PJs. That's the explanations over. I'm halfway through the book of Form and Emptiness, and I feel like what I was told this book would be is different from what this book actually is. So we've got this boy who loses his father at the very beginning, but it's kind of told from the perspective of him and his mother, and them both dealing with their grief and how it manifests in different ways in terms of their mental health. The way it was told to me was that inanimate objects were going to start speaking to the boy, but it doesn't feel like it's magical realism so much as it is a book about mental health, like whether the inanimate objects are really speaking to him or not. And also he goes to the library because it's quiet there, because things know they have to be quiet, but again, it's not really why he goes to the library. So I feel like all the things people have told me about this book have not really been completely accurate about what this book is about. But as I said, I'm halfway through now, and that is already like 9 hours of listening to the audiobook. It's a lot, it's a long book, and I feel like it's just quite repetitive so far. The story was being told, and then we get these interruptions where the boy who is the main character, Benny O, talks to us directly or talks to the book directly, and the book talks as well, his book. And so those things are kind of breaking the fourth wall. I don't know if you call that in book form, but breaking the barrier between it being fiction, becoming like metafiction, and talking directly to you as a reader, which I don't mind when that happens in books if it's done well. I think it can be an interesting way to comment on it, especially because this is a book kind of about books and narrative and the way we discuss things and how that has an effect on our reality. But I don't in this book particularly enjoy the way that it is being used. I think that the writing is pretty skillful and quite lovely in some sections, particularly the sections before Benny's, that are like flashbacks to when Benny's dad was alive. Those sections I think are really lovely and warm, and the way the family and the characters are built is really good, and I'm enjoying that. Come a bit repetitive, and like that's something about grief that is repetitive. Everything goes in cycles, or even about mental health and about the ways people you get into cycles with your mental health. But I feel like it's being overdone, and it's making it hard to focus on the bits where the book talks directly to you. Become a bit didactic at times, and they start talking about the book's ideas of the world and about consumerism, late capitalism, climate change, and our addiction to things. And it's really like, I feel jarring for this book to be telling me on one hand about the like fetishization of things and overconsumption, and yet also really itself fetishizing the book as an object, which I feel like is going against, like, it's very contradictory, it's very hypocritical that it talks, the way it talks about books as sacred objects, and doesn't acknowledge the way that books are part of this consumerist capitalist society, and like new covers being published to make you covet a book that you already own and things like that being part of a consumerist society. And it's negative, kind of a slightly negative touch to the way it talks about ebooks and things. Like, I'm sorry, that's kind of goes against what you were saying about climate change and consumerism, and feels very like old man yells at cloud, basic, and like it's not really going into the ideas. It feels like eye-rolly, and I'm just not really, I just don't really enjoy that. I think that it could be done in such a more interesting way, but it feels like exactly what you expect. And this is why I often don't like books about books. I know that it's something that people love, and Jen Campbell in her video where she read the shortlist talked about how, like, in the Oscars, films about films often do well, and on book prizes, books about books often do well. But I often don't love books about books because I feel like they can become very self-congratulatory, particularly books where main characters are readers or writers. It can become very much like, oh, about the virtues of those things and how great you are for liking books, and it's like, it's no better a hobby than any other hobby. Whilst I think that stories are important and the value of stories is something that is important to humanity, I don't think that books are the same as stories. Anyway, it just, yeah, it feels like it's the rote idea of what you expect when someone who writes books talks about books. One of the things that I did find kind of funny listening to the audiobook is that there is a character called Slavoj, who is a homeless man who hears voices, that meets our main character, and the audiobook narrator was 100% doing a Slavoj Zizek impression. Like, I could literally imagine him spitting on our protagonist. So I think probably he is called Slavoj to reference Slavoj Zizek because he is like a philosopher, and talking about our conceptions of stories and things, which is obviously something that Slavoj Zizek talks about. I will keep reading it because, like I said, I'm enjoying the writing, and I think the characters are well developed, but I don't love it. Hello. I slept on my fringe funny and I'm trying to sort it out, but I don't think that's worked. Oh, we'll sort it out properly in a minute. I finished the book Of Form and Emptiness by Ruth Ozeki, and my feelings haven't really changed that much since halfway through. I thought it was fine and readable, and I felt the character development was done well enough for the two main characters. Other characters did feel a bit off the wall, but I do think that that was intentional because of the nature of the book, and it's dealing with like what is real as a philosophical question, and stories we tell. So I think that was like fair enough and understandable, but overall I just thought it was too long. I think, as every review I've heard of this has said, this is unnecessarily long. Like I said earlier, I don't really like books about books. I find that they can be a bit self-important, self-aggrandizing, and cheesy, just cringy and cheesy, and I think that this book was kind of all of those things. Definitely towards the end it got cheesier and cringier as it went on, and I felt that was true about all of the politics that was kind of brought up, because like there's a very important election that happens, and then there's rioting in the streets, and like I'm kind of getting annoyed about the amount of people using clearly Trump but not using the name or the word so that they don't date it, but they've dated it by making it so clear in the first place. Like, just say it then. It kind of annoys me, especially because they were like then chanting protest slogans that are very much of this time. So like the idea that it could be a different important presidential election is ridiculous. Like, it clearly is, so just say it. And I also find that I'm not hugely into current day politics in books in general, because I feel like people can be quite hyperbolic, the immediacy of it, so it feels more important because it's immediate. Of course I don't think that Trump was a good president, but did he do anything as bad as the Vietnam War or the Iran-Contra scandal? I also don't think he did that. So like, whilst I do think he did bad things, I'm not saying that, I just mean the lack of context. But yeah, overall this was overly long and a bit cringy. It was well written, like it wasn't badly written, it didn't really appeal or speak to me. I am partway through, about 20% of the way through Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason. I thought that this was Australian. For some reason, I really thought it was Australian. She lives in Sydney, right, but I don't know if she is Australian or not, because this is definitely set in London, and the characters are definitely like British, so I just made an assumption that it was Australian, but it's not. And I'm enjoying it more than I thought I would, but it was reminding me of No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood, in that it's not as like online, it's not online at all really, but it's got that kind of detached, unserious tone where we're talking about very serious things but we can't possibly be earnest or take anything seriously. which, I mean, I think is the tone in which most people speak, in Western culture at least. Tone feels similar to Patricia Lockwood. And then also the other thing is that we are being told this story of this woman who at the very beginning is breaking up with her husband, and then we go back to her childhood and the time when she says something exploded in her brain. And I wasn't sure, it felt like it's definitely about mental health, but it also felt like it could be a bit like physical health, like chronic fatigue and things felt like they were part of it, which I know can be a part of depression. But anyway, yeah, so, and then we go back and we're telling the story, but there are all these like little short vignette-y bits of her relationship with her husband that are like thrown in, or her relationships with like just a random sentence of, this is the worst thing Ingrid has ever said to me, you've basically turned into mum, and like it doesn't relate to any of the rest of it. And those kind of little tweet-sized vignettes, that's what's reminding me of No One Is Talking About This in this. And I didn't love No One Is Talking About This. I didn't hate it either. This one, not quite as funny as that, but it is funny. There is a humorousness to it. It's also giving me Pursuit of Love and Love in a Cold Climate vibes, that kind of really spiky families and the really like sarcasm and the no earnestness and kind of this arch look at the family from a detached perspective, even though it's from someone inside the family. The relationships between the characters do feel very realistic, although very privileged. But yeah, I'm enjoying it ish, and I will get back to you when I've actually read some more, hopefully feel a bit better. And yeah, I still need to go to the library and pick up some of the books for this. I have also finished Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason, and I would say I would like that dress, please, although not in yellow. Yellow is not my colour, but if I could have that in like a poppy red, please. Universe, does anyone know where the dress comes from? Regardless, about this book itself. I have an interesting relationship with this book. As someone who is maybe biographically closer to it, I'm not 40, I'm not married, those details not so much, but some of the details in here ring true for my life, not entirely, but there are some things. And I've talked before about how, do you like a book more when you feel a relation to, a sort of understanding of yourself and a reflection of some of your own thoughts in a book. And I do, but I also enjoy books that are so totally different from my experience. So I don't think it's the only way to enjoy a book, but definitely something that I've noticed in this book. The vibes, it kind of reminds me of like Queenie by Candice Carty-Williams, although, like I was saying earlier, more privileged and white background than Queenie, so it doesn't deal with the same like cultural things and gentrification that Queenie talks about. It's more, it's different than that. But I've also talked about how I like weird dysfunctional big families, and that was definitely at play in here. I really enjoy those familial relationships, and I enjoyed that. I don't, generally speaking, love books about motherhood, which this definitely was. This feels like it's like one of those women's fiction books that walks the line between commercial and literary. Like, it's well written, it's exploring more psychological things, and there's not really much of a plot. Although there is enough of a plot, I would say that's why it can end up on the more commercial end, and I would say that the writing style is super accessible. So if you are someone who, generally speaking, prefers plot and more like commercial things, but were interested in some of those like depressed women books, I think that this one would do better than some of the like Tessa Moshfegh's, or not that I've read it so I can't speak to it, but from what I hear of that, it can be a bit off-putting with the like level of disgust it goes into, and the like really not wanting you to care about the characters. This has like warmth and you care about the characters, and I wrote a note at one point about how much I love love stories, which I do, but I don't often read romance because I feel like there's just too many red flags and things that wind me up. Because what I like about love stories is that part of this book did well is those really small, like close, intimate moments, not the like big dramatic plot points, and I think that this did that well. So the drawing of characters I thought was really good in here. Could have done without the relentless fat phobia, could have left that out of it, but apart from that, there was, yeah, and again, a book about a writer, but I didn't find it too annoying and twee in here, I think, because that wasn't like the main thing. Yeah, overall I liked it, I enjoyed it, but I feel like it's going to be a fairly forgettable book for me. Like, it was an interesting reading experience, it moved me in some ways. I felt like some of the reveals and the ending were not 100%, and I feel like it's because they went more in that like wrapping things up nicely, or like giving you plot points of a more commercial book. Like, it went in that direction of where like it gave you something to grasp onto if you're used to a traditional story structure, and I would have preferred a bit more like ambiguity and a bit more like nuance in its allowing its characters to be vile, like it did to some extent, but I think it gave everyone, I don't know, it felt a bit safe towards the end, and it had gone there into a really dark place, but it like brought you back. And if that's something you like, I know that that's something people like, it can like take you there and talk about those darker things, but it doesn't ever feel like you're going to be really unsettled by the book. It's not an unsettling book in any way. The thing about it never names the mental illness from which she is suffering, which I didn't mind at all until the point where she got the diagnosis, but it was left as like 2 blanks in here. And I don't think that's a spoiler, but I would rather it have not been that way. Like, I'd rather it not have been those 2 blanks, because I think they call attention to it in a way that's like, well, I'm not going to tell you. It feels like I can see the writer in that point being like, well, I'm not going to tell you because you don't need to know. And I feel like she could have made the points of like stigma of mental illness and of labels and are they important, and like it doesn't matter what she has, it matters the effect that it's had on her life, without doing it in that really blatant, obvious way. I didn't love that. But yeah, so far, out of all the ones I've read, I'd say I put this one at the bottom, and then The Great Circle, and then Sorrow and Bliss. I've also started listening to The Sentence, and I'm enjoying the writing, but I've only listened to like an hour of it so far, so I will tell you more about it when I get further in. It's Saturday today. I've been unwell. I have been very unwell this week. Like, went home early from work on Thursday with chest pains, and was supposed to film yesterday. I worked from home. I got dressed up ready to film after work, and I had to go and lie down because it was the first day of my period and I got hit with a massive migraine, basically. But yeah, I've not been well. So this vlog may end up being postponed to a bit later because it's Saturday and I've still got 3 books to read. And I'm not sure. I don't have any plans apart from like tidying my house and cooking food. So hello. So this vlog has gone kind of off the rails. I had a 2-day migraine and then my SD card corrupted, and rather than Google it, how to fix it myself, I freaked out and made my boyfriend fix it for me, because I'm a perfectly capable 29-year-old woman. Yeah, it's fixed now, and I'm sure next time, hopefully, I will just fix it myself, because it doesn't seem to be too difficult. So this video was supposed to go up yesterday, but obviously has not happened. But I have books to talk to you about, and it means that I haven't been able to talk to you about my thoughts on them partway through, because I just kept reading. I have finished The Island of Missing Trees by Elif Shafak, and out of the ones I've read so far, this is my least favourite. I really didn't like this book, and that's really disappointing. Obviously I wanted to like all of them, and also I feel like out of all of them, this is the one I was the most hyped for because of Simon's Savage Reads talking about how much he loved this book and how it was one of his favourite books. And I'm sorry, Simon, but I just don't understand how. I really, really dislike this book. I think from reading this and also the Book of Form and Emptiness, I have decided that I don't like being lectured to by inanimate objects in my books. And I just don't really like that device. I think of using an inanimate object in order to do a load of exposition and talk about the research that you've done about like nature in this case. It felt really obvious, a really obvious literary device where the writer felt very front and centre. And I don't always mind literary devices where the writer becomes part of the story, not where it becomes clear it's a construction, if we're kind of looking at that and that's the point of it. But that didn't feel like it in here. I also felt like this was incredibly earnest, and I can't handle books that are too earnest. They really don't sit well with me. I haven't told you what it's about. So this is set between 2 time periods. We have 1974, where Kostas and Daphne are in Cyprus at the beginning of the Cypriot Civil War. I think it's called a civil war between Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots. Daphne is a Turkish Cypriot, Christos is a Greek Cypriot, and they are young teenagers and they are in love. Right from the beginning they are like dating, and we see how the civil war affects their relationship. And then we also have, I don't know if it's quite the present day, mid 2010s, we have their daughter Ada, who is 16 years old and is having a hard time in school. She's lost her mum a year before, so it's about grief, and her dad's dealing with that as well. And she's never been to Cyprus, and her parents never really talked about Cyprus. And so she kind of wants to know more about her past and wants to not be treated like a child. But overall, yeah, I didn't love it. I never really believed that these characters were real people. They all felt quite constructed, and in a way that, again, as I said, didn't feel intentional. They weren't like archetypes constructed for the point of telling the story. They felt like over dramatic and not realistic to me. They felt like characters from a soap opera, and I think that was the problem I had with a lot of it, was that the dialogue was so overwrought, and I also felt like there was a lot of times where the plot was very obvious what was happening, but things were revealed as if they were supposed to shock us. Like, this is not really a spoiler, it's like a minor version of when this happens. Any of the major versions could possibly be a spoiler, but the minor version, there was this point where this character was walking down the street and soldiers were shouting at him and he was not responding, and so they were shouting in English and then Greek and then Turkish and he was not responding, and I was like, oh, so he's deaf. And it kept being like quite clear that he was deaf, that like everything was very much pointing to the fact he was deaf, and then it goes, and he was deaf, as if that should be a massive reveal when it was really, really obvious. And there was another time when that happened. And I guess this bit is a little bit of a spoiler, so if you want to skip this bit. But I have mentioned before how much I hate the trope of they have sex once and she gets pregnant, because it means you're only putting the sex in order for this like dramatic pregnancy thing to happen, and it makes that whole dramatic pregnancy thing not that dramatic, because we already know from the point that you've pointed out that they've had sex that is what's going to happen. Yeah, and I also feel like it's like that woman loses her virginity and gets punished for it trope that's throughout literature and television, and I just find it really tired and overdone, and I don't enjoy books where that happens. I know, like, I'm not saying it's not possible, it's perfectly possible, but it's not an enjoyable literary trope for me. I find it tired and tiresome, and like it's the same with the death thing. It's like, oh well, now this is obviously what's going to happen. You're making everything too obvious, and it's not that I love twists and turns in books. I love books where absolutely nothing happens, but I don't like books that try to put a twist in but make it so obvious and try to give you this emotional, it felt like it was trying to give me all this emotional like impact, but it hadn't been set up with enough skill or finesse. It hadn't been set up with enough reality of these characters. I didn't feel invested for the emotional part to have any sort of impact at all, and there was a lot of like extended metaphors that didn't work that well, similes that felt tired. I just felt like it was not that well written, and like underdeveloped characters, underdeveloped setting, overly earnest and really trying too hard, and I didn't like this book. I didn't like this book at all. I have also finished The Sentence by Louise Erdrich, and this is my favourite. So going from my least favourite to my favourite, this is my favourite of the books that I have talked about so far. I really enjoyed this book, and I went in with quite lower expectations because a lot of people haven't really liked it. There's been a lot of mixed reviews. I haven't watched everyone's Women's Prize things yet because I didn't want to like spoil my own opinions by putting other people's opinions in there, but from what I've heard in passing is that a lot of people didn't love this book, and I absolutely did. So The Sentence is about Tuki, who is an Ojibwe, I think, and she's an Ojibwe Anishinaabe woman from the Midwest, I think, in America, and she is at the beginning. She's had some like difficult things in her life. She's dealt with drug addiction and things, and at the beginning this kind of absurd surreal event happens that results in her ending up in prison, and that all happens very early on, and then we move into where she's come out of prison. She's been given a job at a bookshop, which is Louise Erdrich's bookshop that she owns, and Louise Erdrich is a character in here, which I actually enjoyed. It could have been done in a cheesy way, but I really think that the way it was integrated worked really well. It was just quite like amusing without being annoying. Anyway, so she's working in this bookshop, and one of these annoying customers that was a repeat customer dies and is now haunting the bookshop, and that's kind of everything unfolds from there. I love the way Louise Erdrich writes. This is my first time reading a Louise Erdrich book. I intended to read The Night Watchman last year and I never really got round to it, but I love the way that she writes. I think it's so smooth. It feels like you're being told a story, and I did listen to the audiobook, and Louise Erdrich does read it herself, and it just felt so, it felt very organic and very natural, the way to be told a story from Tookie's perspective as well. Her as a character, she felt so well fleshed out. I really felt like I knew her as a person. She was nuanced in a way that I think some of the other books haven't allowed their characters to be nuanced. They haven't allowed their characters to be bad in a way that doesn't make them bad people, but is making decisions that feel true and honest to the character rather than the plot, but without having us to judge her. I don't know, I really think that the way she does character is so great. Her and relationships, the relationship between Tookie and her husband, and between her husband's niece and Tookie as well, this sort of fractious relationship and motherhood, the way that was involved, I thought was really lovely. The way that sort of, like I said, Tookie is Ojibwe and Anishinaabe, and the way that Indigenous culture and Indigenous ritual and things were worked into the book felt very realistic, because it didn't feel like I was being explained it to me as an outsider, and yet at the same time it didn't feel like I couldn't understand what was going on. It felt like it really walked that line very well, of being clearly written, like Louise Erdrich is Indigenous woman, and it felt like the book was written from that perspective, but not necessarily to handhold people who are not from that perspective and don't know anything about it, as I myself am not Indigenous and didn't grow up in a place where it also talks about the pandemic, and I wasn't sure how I was going to appreciate that. So it goes from November 2019 to November 2020, and I wasn't sure how well I was going to get on with the pandemic part of it, because I often, as I spoke about with the Book of Form and Emptiness, don't love really super modern politics, because I feel like it's not put into perspective enough. But I thought that this one really was, because it was so down to the personal story and just to Tookie's experience of the pandemic, and so it felt much more real. It didn't try and give any big overarching stories, and I think that that's what I liked about this one compared to a lot of the others, is that it talked about the history of stolen land, and it talked about the experience of living as an Indigenous person in modern America. It talked about incarceration and the incarceration of Black and Indigenous people in America. It talked about George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter protests in June 2020, and how like Tookie couldn't go because she's formerly incarcerated, and how that would have had an effect on her, and the haunting of the land, like the haunting of America, as well as the haunting of the shop. I think that the way those things were were like reflected one another, I thought was done in such a subtle way. So it talks about politics and it talks about like big themes, but it does it from such a limited perspective in a way that I really appreciate, because it allows you to extrapolate those things yourself without like trying to force on you a message of the extrapolation, which I feel is what the Book of Form and Emptiness and the Island of Missing Trees and even The Great Circle to a certain extent, not as much as those two, but they give you the message in a broader way. They give you their objective rather than allowing you to read the objective, and I feel like the sentence did that so much better. And like I said, the way that she tells the story, it just feels so warm, and it's not as melodramatic as some of these other books were either. There are moments when it could have gone that way, and the thing is that it's not that melodrama is not realistic that's the reason that I have a problem with it. It's just that there's a moment in this when something could have gone in a more sad, dramatic way, and it doesn't, and I feel like that felt much more restrained, and I liked that about this book, that it was much more restrained than some of the others. I'm halfway through The Bread the Devil Knead by Lisa Allen-Agostini, and so far I feel like kind of medium about this book. It could go either way. So it's about this girl, it's about this woman, Alethea, who is 40 years old. She lives in Trinidad, and she is in an abusive relationship with this man who used to be famous, and is an alcoholic and is abusive to her. And then she meets her brother and her best friend from when she was younger on the same day, and then also a woman is shot in front of her shop, the shop where she is the manager, and this kind of sets off her thinking about her own life, some of her history that she's repressed, and her present and her potential future. And so far I wish that I had the audiobook of this, because it is written in patois and dialect, and I would prefer to have that read to me. I always find it more immersive. I'm not struggling to read or understand what's going on. I just enjoy reading that I enjoy listening to things that are written outside of my own accent. And when that is a specific like part of it, but I think it's done well. So far, yeah, I'm just, everything's feeling a bit convenient, that because the encounters to begin with I thought were fine, but the way that the plot's going on, it does feel a bit like convenient, the way things are happening, and I'm just feel like I'm not that invested, and I don't know what it is that's leaving me feeling at a distance from this character, but I do. I also feel like the setting is not that well evoked, and it just doesn't feel quite grounded. I'm not sure what it is that's leaving me feeling a bit distant from this book so far. So I will read more and hopefully come up with a better review later. The hottest day of the year so far, somewhere between 32 and 34 degrees. And I've just been watching TikToks of people who like moved to the UK from Miami or Nigeria and were like, I'm used to 30 degrees, it won't be a big problem. And then they experience 30 degrees in the UK and they're like, I'm dying, why am I dying? So I'm in my north facing office because it's the coolest room in the house. I have all of the blinds and windows closed to try and keep the heat from getting into the house, because that's when the problems arise. I have a conservatory, which means that it's going to be about, it's 30 degrees outside, it's probably going to be about 45 degrees in that conservatory. So we're going to do our best to stay cool and stay inside. Yeah, so I will start work now soon, but hopefully I will also manage to finish this book over my lunch break and in the next half hour and stuff. I have finished The Bread the Devil Knead by Lisa Allen-Agostini. And I thought it was just fine. This book deals with a lot of very dark topics over and over and over again. And that's kind of what it's centred around, is violence and abuse of women, physical abuse and sexual abuse within families, and the continuation of that. I liked the patois that it was written in. I thought that that was done well. And I thought that our main character was pretty well fleshed out, although the other characters did feel a little like stand-ins. There were some points where she was trying to talk about like colorism in Trinidad that I thought was just like kind of randomly thrown in without much background to it. Not like background, but it just would occasionally crop up, but it never really felt that fleshed out. And it reminded me most of Dominicana by Angie Cruz, which I read when I was reading the Women's Prize a couple of years ago, which I will leave up there. And yeah, it kind of had a similar feeling to it, of being like fairly well written but not particularly interesting in terms of the style of writing, apart from the fact that it's in a dialect, but there was nothing more to the writing than that, except for random bits thrown in about like words and stuff that just felt a bit odd. I felt like it was trying to do certain things and it just wasn't, it was only managing to fulfill one of them, and the rest of the things felt like a bit, they fell to the wayside. It was fine. Yeah, that's mostly what I can say about this one. I thought it was fine, and if it sounds interesting to you, then it might be worth a read, but it's nothing to go out of your way to read, I wouldn't say, and I'm a little surprised it's on the shortlist. I have to say that out of every single book that I've read from the long list, and it's just the shortlist plus one, but Build Your House Around My Body by Violet Cooper Smith is still my favourite out of all of them, and that was on the, and that was on the long list, but it didn't make the shortlist, and this did, and The Island of Missing Trees did, and those things, I'm like, I think Build Your House Around My Body was a more interesting book, and really, I loved it, and so I'm kind of disappointed that it didn't like make it further than, and some of these books did. But whenever I've read the Women's Prize shortlist, there are always some that are on there that I just don't understand, and I guess they're not for me. So yeah, overall, if I was to do my rankings, let me grab the other ones. No surprise, The Island of Missing Trees would come in 6th. Then we'd have The Bread the Devil Knead by Lisa Allen-Agostini. Then on top of that, The Book of Form and Emptiness by Ruth Ozeki. Next we would have The Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead, which I don't have here because I read it last year. Then Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason would be my number 2, and my number 1 would be The Sentence, because it's the only book that I actually loved out of all of these books. I did really love that one, so I'm glad I read it, because I'm not sure I would have, actually, had I not been reading the shortlist, because the reviews have been so mixed. Louise Erdrich is an author that I have been intending to read for a while, but the reviews of that one have been so mixed that I'm not sure I would have actually gone for it. A lot of people saying it was just meh, but I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed that style of storytelling. I really enjoy her writing, and I thought that those characters, out of all of the characters, were the most well developed, except maybe The Great Circle had some really well developed characters, but it also had an awful second timeline, so that kind of lost it for it. As I said, probably in this video, definitely in the Book of Prize video, that the historical part of that would have been one of my favourite novels of the year, last year, but the modern timeline wound me up so much. I wanted The Sentence to win. I thought that The Great Circle would win, because it seems to be a lot of people's favourites. It's definitely the popular winner. But what actually ended up winning was the Book of Form and Emptiness by Ruth Ozeki, and I have to say, I haven't heard a good review of this, and I didn't love it either, so I'm quite surprised by that. Please remember to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, to subscribe. I try to put out new videos twice a week. Been struggling, but I try. And I will put last year's Women's Shortlist video here if you're interested in checking that out, and a playlist of me reading all sorts of different prize shortlists here as well, because I think you might enjoy that if you enjoyed this. And I will see you again very soon. So thank you very much for watching. Bye bye!